So this morning we're putting out things into our set up campsite here. Because a lot of people really don't consider wild animals when they're out hiking or backpacking. And so a lot of times we'll take food into our tent with us. Sometimes we might. So some things that we want to think about when we are out camping is obviously everything that has a smell. So even non-traditional things. Obviously we're going to think about food having a scent to it and being interesting to eat, but we need to think about our toiletries, toothpaste, deodorant, hairspray. Those kinds of things have a really interesting smell to them. And as I said before, whether you can hear me or not, bears love anything that has an interesting scent, and they will try eating anything once. They may not go back to it later, but they'll try it once. And interestingly, a bear can remember food it found 10 years ago. It can remember where it found it, whether it was good to eat, and whether it wants to eat it again. They have incredible memories. So we have an eating area right next to our tent, and we'll see how well that works. We have backpacks hanging in the trees, other food items like the cooler that we're storing our food in. There's our Kima and Denali, and they are brown bears that originally came from the Washington State University Research Center. They were born there. Their mother was there at the research center. And these two guys are brothers. And they've been at the zoo for how long, Pam? They've been here since they were a year old. So this is home to them. This is normal, and this is all they would expect out of the world. And it's a beautiful exhibit, and it gives them a lot of interesting things to explore. And the keepers do a fantastic job of making their enclosure interesting to them. They put out little scent markings out here and things they can find and try to keep them mentally stimulated because they spend a lot of time out here. And they need to have things to do and need to have things that their brains work on. They know this is coming. They love this. Every year it's like their favorite day of the whole year. Two bears are about 900 pounds apiece, which is large for a grizzly bear. The grizzly bears that we have in the lower 48 states in the U.S., in Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, and Washington, they tend to be more in the 400 to 600 pound range, so they would be smaller than these guys. We have a lot of black bears in North America, and they tend to be quite a bit smaller. A female black bear is 120 to 150 pounds, and a male black bear can be 150 to maybe 300 pounds. You can see if you had left food in your sleeping bag in your tent and went off for a hike, you might come back and find that backside sticking out of your tent. We can hope that you might have gone for a hike before you saw that, and that it wasn't overnight and somebody decided to come in and check out your sleeping bag while you were sleeping. So if we were to do this campsite right, we would make sure that all our food products, this includes garbage, it includes the pots and pans that you cooked with, it would even include the clothes that you were cooking in. If there was any grease from the food you were cooking that splattered onto your clothes, they smell just like your dinner smelled. Everything that you can associate with food needs to be separate from your sleeping area. It's recommended that it be about 100 yards away. Any of your toiletries, like I said before, they have a really interesting smell, and you can imagine toothpaste probably tastes just fine if you were a bear. That needs to be stored with your food and your garbage and your cooking utensils. 100 yards away from your camping area where you're sleeping. In general, it's recommended that your cooking area is 100 yards away from your sleeping area as well. You don't need to cook and store your food in the same spot. So no kind of food whatsoever in your tent. Actually pretty average for a brown bear that you might find along the coast of Alaska or British Columbia, or even coastal bears in Russia and the northern... It's like a little dress almost. Actually, bears in Washington and Idaho, grizzly bears that used to occupy these two states, about 60% of their diet was made up of salmon. But today, the remaining bears in Idaho and Washington actually don't eat any salmon anymore. But these coastal brown bears are not the largest of the bears. Kodiak bears are a subspecies of brown bear that live only on 3 islands in Alaska. And they can average more in the 850 range, but they can top out at 1,300 pounds. And that's because about 78% of their diet is made up of high-protein fish with lots of fat and lots of protein in it. Bears in Washington, black bears and grizzly bears. We have a small grizzly bear population. Bears in Washington, about 80 to 90% of their diet is plants. We tend to think of bears as big meat eaters, and certainly the bears that have access to large salmon runs are big meat eaters. But the bears in Washington tend to be primarily plant eaters and vegetarians. They're actually omnivores because they do eat a lot of insects, and they eat other types of meat that they can find as well. But about the 10% of their diet that is protein and meat source, a lot of that is in the springtime. They'll come across carcasses of animals that have died due to the weather and illness over the winter. So any winter kill animals, carcasses, the bears will eat those as soon as they come out of their hibernation dens. But the primary protein source for bears is insects. They like ants, they like beetles, they'll tear up logs to find grubs and insects inside the logs. They like honeybees as much as they like the honey. It's a very good source of protein for them. There are over 100 different plant species that we know of in the North Cascades that grizzly bears eat. So a majority of their diet really is plant food. So we do still have grizzly bears in Washington state. We have a very small population. Somewhere between 5 and 20 bears are all that are left. Boy, they just make short work of those coolers. You can see how a cooler's not going to really help you as far as food storage. So about 150 years ago, there were somewhere around 100,000 grizzly bears in the lower 48 states. And today, they're somewhere around 1,600 is our best estimate. And they are located in 6 recovery areas in the lower 48 states. But historically, they would have been all the way into central Mexico. There were grizzly bears in the mountains of Mexico, and they would have been east all the way to the Mississippi River. And certainly we had plenty of them here in Washington state. During a 30-year period in the early 1800s, there were 4,000 grizzly bear pelts that were taken out of the Cascade Mountains. These bears need a lot of area in the wild. Bears have home ranges, which are different than a territory. A territory is something that's actively defended and patrolled. Cougars and many of the cats, for instance, have territories that they patrol very actively and regularly. Bears are not like that. Bears have home ranges, and they tolerate other bears in their home range to a large degree. And their home range needs to be large enough that they can find enough food. So for a grizzly bear, we're talking from maybe 50 square miles up to 500 square miles in their home range. Now, if you think about what their food is, it's plants. So they're looking for different plants in different months out of the year, out of the spring, summer, and fall, that will be actively growing, that will be a good food source, that might have berries, that might have nuts, that might have seeds that can benefit them and add to their diet. So you have to know about bears liking berries and loving blueberries and all different types of berries, and it's very true. In the fall, their berries are very abundant. Actually, throughout the summer we have different berry plants like salmon berries and huckleberries. And then in the fall, certainly there's a big proliferation of berries. So every year he tries the same technique of throwing it in the air and bouncing it off the rocks. It's because, remember I said they had a good memory. Yeah, plus it's probably just a lot of fun.
Oh, now I got it.